Welcome to the Williamsville Public Library Museum. We're here talking today to Harold Carter about his time with the Williamsville Lumber Company. So I understand that was one of your first jobs here. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I was a farm boy that moved down from Middletown when we sold out in '63, and I showed cattle at the Logan County Fair, and then come to find out I was relocated down here in the summer of '63. So again, since I was a farm boy, I didn't have any chores to do. I didn't have to do a lot of stuff around the farm. So I had to find something to do. And my dad had died in '60, and so I had already developed my methods of making income, and I thought, well, I'll just run down to the lumberyard and see if they need any help. So when I went in, Bill Campbell didn't know me from Adam. I didn't know him. So I told him I was looking to find a job and didn't know where to start. And he said, well, what are you qualified to do? I said, well, I'm a farm boy. I've always worked around cattle and hogs and everything in the farm operation, baled hay and shelled corn. So he said, you took care of cattle? I said, well, yeah. We had a couple hundred calves or cows and, whatever. So he said, well, I just happen to have some feeder calves that I need someone to help me out taking care of. Yeah, sure. And he said, well, that was in the middle of summer, actually. Well, it wasn't middle, it was the end of summer, so before school started anyway. So he said, well, why don't you work at the lumberyard too then? And then when it's time in the afternoon, I'll turn you loose and you can go take care of the calves. I said, okay. So that's how I started with Bill. Then after we closed at noon on Saturdays, I had time, so I went down and I went to work at the gas station, Wilbur Falls gas station. But the lumberyard business, back then, Bill was one of 3 lumber yards. The Campbell family had, Lyman, his dad, had the lumberyard / elevator, grain elevator in Rochester. Jim, his brother, who ended up working for the county sheriff, and then his son now is the sheriff, had a yard in Riverton. But our yard here in Williamsville had a train siding. Well, back then, the way there were no semis running around. If you wanted something, you bought a boxcar load of lumber. Or in our case, back then they didn't have the ready-mix concrete trucks. So we bought in 90-pound bags of concrete that the guys would mix and pour concrete. So when you ordered in a boxcar of anything, there were no forklifts, no bobcats. So you backed the truck up to the door and you started unloading one board at a time. And in the course of transportation to get here on the railroad, those boards would interlace themselves. So you took it apart like a puzzle, and the 90-pound bags you unloaded one by one. And we furnished our yard and the other 2 yards. And on occasion, Bill Doom would order, the Doom Lumber Company out here north of town, would order in with Bill Campbell, and we would offload onto his trucks too. So we did a lot of railroad business, and then we had builders that built everywhere, new houses here and there and out in the country, and remodeling jobs, and we'd work with those all the time. They had gotten away from the square nails by then, but we still had some kegs of square nails. We also did glazing of windows.
Oh, why?
So if someone would come in with a broken window pane, we'd clean it all out and get the glass up on the frame and measure it and move it over, and we'd cut the glass and we'd put it in when we'd take our glazing compound and we'd glaze it all in, and there it was. Also we moved a lot of lumber, and Bill knew a lot of people. I said before that Patterson's probably my biggest mentor. I should qualify that by saying Ellsworth Patterson really kind of took me under his wing and was very supportive. I probably learned more of my entrepreneurs, whatever you call it, from Bill, though, because Bill was a wheeler dealer. He bought and sold a lot of stuff, and we were a pretty good lumberyard. And like I say, between Riverton and Lyman running the elevator, actually, along with the lumberyard down in Rochester, we moved a lot of material.
So did they deal mainly with businesses, or did they deal with the general public as well as a lumberyard?
General public.
Okay.
General public. Anytime even a business had anything to do, they'd contact Willie Vanali or any of the contractors that we worked with at the time. We were located right, actually where the new elevator office scale house is on the corner. There was a house there that Bucket Brennan family grew up with, and then we were right next door. And use it. So as the elevator.
So as a lumber yard, when we think of a lumber yard, I'm thinking building supplies. What other things did they sell, or what other services did they provide other than building supplies?
Did a lot of mixing of paint.
Okay.
We had our own paint mixer, and we would mix gallons and gallons of paint. The lumber that we sold back then, which we considered to be top of the line, was Douglas fir, because it was so clear, so beautiful lumber. Come to find out, it did not have the load bearing capabilities that the yellow pine did. What we originally started out regarding as cheap lumber, yellow pine, is today the standard for weight bearing lumber. You can span 16 feet with a 2x10 yellow pine, but you can't do that with Douglas fir. You have to go down to 12 feet.
So aside from changes in how you regarded the different types of lumber, how else do you think the lumberyard business has changed?
Well, I don't know about the lumberyard business necessarily, but home building, they talk about the good old days, and they don't build them like they used to, and all I've got to say is thank God for that.
So how do you say that?
Well, because back then we dealt with rafters, and rafters just don't have the weight bearing that the new truss systems are just unbelievable, what you can span and how you can span, and free span. You don't even have to have weight bearing walls interior, if you beef up your trusses enough. So the good old days, and they don't build them like they used to. I say thank God for that.
All right, so house building has changed. When I say the lumber business, I mean, we don't have a lumber yard anymore. Why do you think we've kind of transitioned away from having lumber yards as a local business?
You can't compete with the big box stores. They buy in the quantities, and they're very competitive between them amongst themselves. The markup in lumber today compared to back then was just like cars. Cars, you used to have an 18% markup. Today, my God, if they had 18% markup on a $90,000 car, the dealer would make a ton on one vehicle. Well, lumber was the same way. And you had the grades of lumber. You had number one, you had number two, and number two you can build a house out of, but you go much lower than number two, you better forget it.
Aside from the economics of it, what else do you think has changed about the way those businesses do business today?
Well, they're so diversified. You can go to a lumber yard, and top to bottom, you can buy all your flooring there, your carpet. You can buy kitchen countertops, windows, any kind of window treatments, anything it takes to put a house together. It wasn't that way with a lumber yard.
Right.
With a lumber yard back when I was young, you sold lumber and paint and nails and concrete bags. We did deliver a lot of water to the country people. We had a 1,000-gallon tank, and we were always hauling 1,000 gallons of water to some farm somewhere.
So what do you think the lumberyard meant in terms of local history in Williamsville? How do you think it was a part of Williamsville's local history?
So it was the center of local history. The people that worked there, Burma Vickers, I worked with him. Bob Tibbs, my brother-in-law, came on later. Bobby Sagal. Bobby and I worked a lot together. We put on roofs. The lumberyard was the center of the town. Grocery store, you had to have, but the lumberyard was where it all happened.
And about how big was Williamsville at that time? About how many houses? Do you remember roughly, or how many people?
Well, in 1989, when I started my first subdivision, there were 354 sewer customers, but 1963, gosh, Sherman probably had 200 people. Williamsville might have had 400, In fact, when Carol and I got married, Bill from the lumberyard and Willie Benally, Willie talked me into building a new house. And the lot that Bill sold me, that he owned right across from where he lived on Harpole Street, I bought for $2,500. Being in the subdividing business today, $2,500 won't buy you very much concrete to pour out in front of something,
Right.
But back then, he subdivided that pasture that I fed the cattle in, and Lee Miller built a house at the other end of the pasture. Paul Patterson built a house down at the corner that Don Campbell's widow is now selling. Albert Sagal ended up buying a house next to where we were at on Harpole. So all of those houses were built with Williamsville lumber.
Right.
Back then, we moved a lot of lumber.
So it's safe to say that the lumber company was kind of a cornerstone of Williamsville's history.
Well, in my opinion, it was at the time. I felt like without us, there wouldn't have been much going on.
Right, right, absolutely.
And it was a great business. Bill was a great guy to work with. He partnered up with Alan Patterson, who was Paul Patterson's son, ended up going to Missouri and got into Kentucky Project, got down there. But you know, between those two and Willie with the machine, and Bud Powell was a big figure in town at that time, and was until his death. Those four guys together moved a lot of world here.
Well, Harold, I really appreciate you coming in and sharing your memories about the lumber company, the lumber yard, and how it influenced Williamsville's history. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.